Soulsborne, the genre birthed by From Software's Dark Souls and Bloodborne, has blown up in recent years. With Sekiro taking Game of the Year in 2019, there is no end to their glory in sight, and they mark some of my favorite games of any genre in the last decade. Mortal Shell is a brand new IP in the genre from recently founded company Cold Symmetry. They look to bring a worthy title to the genre, but with Ghost of Tsushima due out in mid-July, Godfall at the end of this year, and Elden Ring sometime in the future, how does Mortal Shell stack up to the competition? In this video, we're going to take a look at the recently released gameplay footage from IGN's exclusive interview with the team. I'll be paraphrasing some of these subjects they talked about just to give you a broader idea of how the game works. If you'd like to watch that 15-minute interview, you can find the link in the description below, but let's sink our teeth into the grim world of Mortal Shell and some of the key features of the game slated for a Q3 launch with a July closed beta. To start off, the game's namesake is actually how you, the main character, interact with the world. There are 4 mortal shells hidden throughout the beginning portions of the game that allow you to take advantage of a number of different playstyles. By inhabiting these shells, you interact with the world and fight the many enemies that will kill you hundreds of times over. What's interesting is that these mortal shells are not just simply suits that you can swap between, but rather evolving characters that, as you learn more about their past, become more and more accessible to you. For instance, the character shown in the gameplay video is just a nameless shell until you spend Tar, or Sacred Nectar, which is the game's Souls currency, to unlock their name and further increase your knowledge of this shell's past. By doing this, you find out a good deal about the lore of this character, growing your relationship with them as you begin to understand what their motives are in life and in the world that has since gone through some sort of cataclysm in the game. They were pretty enigmatic with the background story of Mortal Shell, but it's definitely a fallen or desiccated world where you're using these shells to try and accomplish your goal. Now, not everything in the gameplay trailer was explained, like there are these little blips next to items that are acquired with the title Familiarity. Now, I'm assuming that these are linked to either that individual shell's effective proficiency with a given item, or maybe even reflected in the amount of Tar spent to perhaps increase that familiarity. That's another notion that wasn't terribly expanded upon, is how much the Tar influences the RPG elements of the game. It shows a wheel in the beginning of the gameplay where, as you spend Tar, you unlock more lore and abilities for the character, but it appears like it's more on a set path versus, say, a custom build of each shell. When you make a character in a game like Dark Souls or Bloodborne, you're building out each and every stat and skill as you see fit. But the nature of the shells seems to lock you into a playstyle that pertains to each shell. As far as general gameplay goes, we don't have a ton to go off of outside of what we've seen from the trailers and this exclusive interview, but there are some things worth noting on the way the combat system seems to work. There is an ability to quickly stun enemies, much like the offhand pistol from Bloodborne, but then follow up with a devastating critical strike, a series of combinations that is quite familiar across the genre. It's also a quite fast-paced game. The combat itself seems to have that faster pace from the latter entries in From Software's catalog, and almost a touch of Lords of the Fallen in the mix somewhere in there. So there really is an amalgamation of a lot of games going on in Mortal Shell that will hopefully turn out to be a lot of the previous game's best features versus some of the clunky aspects of the previously mentioned titles. One element of the game that really stands out is when your character reaches 1 health point. They will immediately be expelled from their Mortal Shell, and they have a chance to essentially kill whatever they're attacking quickly or jump back into their shell as fast as they can. The developers mentioned that this will only happen a limited amount of times before you actually die. I'm sure there'll be some sort of cooldown, or say maybe it can happen again every 60 seconds, something of the sort. But another interesting note too is that you can do a real hardcore playthrough where you don't use a single mortal shell, making the game all about not taking damage, which will be interesting to see how that plays out. With all of these features, the game is slated to only be around 20 hours of gameplay, setting you up for a lot of replayability, especially with each mortal shell offering a different approach to the game that should serve for 4 different routes through the campaign, which is quite interesting because the developers mentioned that each shell plays differently, and not just simply from a base mechanic standpoint, but how they execute those base movements. Some shells dodge a certain way or block a certain way. hopefully resulting in a fresh experience that makes some parts of the game harder for some shells and easier for others. With the gameplay covered, I want to talk quickly about my impressions for the game. And I think that Mortal Shells has a lot of really cool things going for it. We're exploring a familiar dark fantasy setting that we've seen across all the Dark Souls series, Lords of the Fallen, and Sekiro. And from that, we're getting a lot of great features from across the genre from a brand new company that is extremely passionate about the subject matter. One developer remarked how they had a deep, introspective conversations about the viability of nihilism, which should make for a satisfying romp through the dark catacombs and underways of Mortal Shell. And I really like the notion of the Mortal Shells bringing a lot of character to your playthrough in a sort of through the eyes of versus a make your own adventure. Sekiro did an amazing job at creating a specific narrative that wasn't the typical build your own adventure approach. But I think that the more linear path is a tried and true approach for the genre now. What I'm worried about is how linear that path might be. Is this a game that isn't going to be as diverse as I think it will be from shell to shell? Are the items in the game not as useful as you would think, reducing the viable ones to a small handful, thus making the familiarity system useless? Another issue I have is the mechanic of the shells themselves. We got something very similar in Code Vein, but they had something over 20 with the blood code system. What I'll really be looking forward to is an expansion upon a lot of the things that make this game interesting and unique right out the gate. The familiarity system, the shells, and the expanding storyline connected to the other two we just mentioned. And once we really get a sense for how many RPG elements are plugged into Mortal Shell, I'll be able to kind of hype myself up even more. The exciting thing about all of this news is that the game is slated for a Q3 launch on both PS4 and PC, and there is a closed beta starting July 3rd through to July 10th. So we'll be able to get a lot of hands-on of the game during that time, and we are allowed to share any footage or screenshots during that time. So if I'm lucky enough to get a beta code, this is definitely a game I will be covering on the channel. Now, I'd love to dip more into this genre as, again, it's one of my favorite genres, and I think that the Mortal Shells brings a lot of interesting aspects to the table in a very familiar wrapper. The future looks a little hazy for the title, but I'm optimistic for the passion and direction that the team hopes to take it in. I mean, worst comes to worst, I can just simply grab a loot and strip my character completely naked, strumming it on the ground like I'm on my roommate's favorite leather couch at 3 in the morning, completely naked, playing an acoustic Fender without his permission, and much to his chagrin. Not that I've ever done that before in my life. But anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching here today. This video is a bit off the beaten path from what I usually cover on the channel, but I got pretty excited about the trailer and wanted to share that excitement with you guys. So let me know in the comments below what you think of the trailer, or if you're into these types of videos, and I'll cover more of the games I hope to make content for and am excited about. Don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe, and if you do subscribe, please go ahead and slap that little bell button next to the subscribe button. That will get you clued in on any of the many streams, giveaways, or videos that I upload to the channel. As always, have a good one, and take care.